we have two customers, right? We have our residents, we have our investors. And it can be hard serving both simultaneously. You have to make some decisions sometimes about like who you're going to prioritize. But at the end of the day, like if you're always doing right by those two customers, then you're going to be doing all right as a business.
This is the real estate investing experience. We get it. Real estate can be rough sometimes. And that's why we bring in the experts to talk about the experiences you won't hear anywhere else. With your hosts, John Cohen and Chris Grinzik.
What's going on, guys? Welcome back to another episode of the Real Estate Investing Experience. I'm your host, Chris Grinzik. With me, as always, is John Cohen. How's it going, bud?
I got no complaints. We're kicking off the new year, starting off well. We are in week 2. I think people are finally getting their shit back together. Last week was a little bit slower, but it's picking up, right? We're rolling, so we're off to a good start, and stuff's starting to happen again, I think.
That's good. What are you guys working on?
Nothing.
Good. Nothing.
No, we had a little deal up in Columbus that we were trying to shake free. It was going to be an assignment, but the kid had it under contract. It was a little high priced, so I asked for $100,000. I really wanted like $300,000, but I knew it wouldn't happen. I asked for $100,000 off, and they went to contract $400,000 higher. I was like, well, there goes that. It just needed too much work. It was a smaller deal, so it really had to make sense, right? It couldn't be marginal, and the price was marginal, so it was a pass. But the new deal that I'm working on now is completely out of my element. It's a buddy of ours, someone that was on our podcast, Kevin Meyer, brought it to us. It's a 6-lot development out in Miller Place.
Ooh, that's interesting.
So it's a distressed seller or a seller that wanted a lot of money, and they just reduced the price significantly. So Kevin called me last night and he said, I would never do this deal, but the price is too good. It's to build 6 single family houses. So I'm sure it won't happen, but we'll see.
Right in Toro's wheelhouse.
Right in our wheelhouse, right? Single family development. That's what we do really well. I didn't even tell Don about it yet. I'm going to call him after this recording. I'll give him a quick call and tell him I have an interesting deal. But we have a property selling in February, and we got to figure out something to do with the money. So why do something that you know when you could do something you know nothing about?
Exactly, right? 2021, new year.
Exactly.
New Toro. Awesome. No mobile home stuff, no land stuff.
Land's rolling. I actually, a deal I've been working on since last June. This is the deal that you read about, right? This is the deal that it's the make-believe deal. Right now we're buying a 40-acre piece of property. There was a death, and, we hung in with the seller. Long story short, we're buying it for about 40, and we'll list it at 160. So it took, since June of last year. So it took a long time, but the seller texted me today saying, he actually said, I wrangled in the cattle, which were all his partners. And, we're excited about it. So that one should be interesting. And then on the mobile home side, we closed finally on a deal that I sent a deposit on the deal on January 27th, 2020. We closed on the deal last Friday officially. So we're underway there. We actually just got a landscaper we're going to spend probably about $30,000 on landscaping, just trimming back trees, clearing brush. Our manager, we had to call our manager yesterday morning, and he said, it's legal to burn down here. He's like, let's make a burn pile. I was like, that is the worst fucking idea I have ever heard in my life.
Where is this?
It's about an hour outside of Charleston, South Carolina. It's in Walterboro, South Carolina. And he said, no, it's fine. You call the fire department, you put up a barrier, and all the tenants can just throw their shit in the fire. I'm like, yeah, no, we're not going to do that. We're going to do it the right way. So, other than that, we're hanging in there, right? We're making offers, but we got some projects that are underway, so we're excited about those.
Well, that's good. Well, if you do the burn pile, definitely get a drone down there, get some footage.
It was funny. I had a couple of people on the call, and they were texting me while we were on the call, and they're like, "Are you fucking crazy? Like, we are not letting this guy burn shit down." And I said, "Of course we're not. This guy's nuts." So. And his answer was the old owner let us do it. And I was like, here, this is not going to happen anymore. So we'll see. But it's if they do decide to burn it, I did throw in the 2 cents, and I'm a pyro, maniac all day. So I said, let me know when, right? I'll come down, get some gasoline, some fireworks, and make it a party.
Yeah, that's not a good recipe.
No, that's a disaster. It's a disaster waiting to happen.
Well, we're definitely going to move on from that. Maybe we shouldn't do the burn pile, but looking forward to hearing how that project goes. But let's jump into today's episode. We got a great guest on today. Excited to have him on. I was on his show and had a really good chat, so excited to have him on ours. So with that being said, Anthony, thanks for joining us, bud.
Yeah, thanks for having me, guys.
Yeah, for sure.
Hey, John, real quickly on the fire front, I just want to say this morning I was reading The Art of War, and there's a whole chapter dedicated to how to fight a war with fire, just with fire. And like at the very end, Sun Tzu's like, and just be careful because the fire can turn on you, and decimate your own army, right? And like, that's just what I imagine here is like, yeah, you took down all the forest, but then you also took down all your assets too.
Without a doubt. That's what I said. And he's like, no, there's a big open piece of land all the way over there. I was like, yeah, you get a little wind and then you get this and then that. And next thing you know, the entire trailer park's burnt to the ground and the neighbor's property, and you got a major lawsuit. So, I can relate.
Yeah. And nobody underwrites for that, right? Like, we burned down our property with a burn pile.
Nope. That's they don't teach you that one anywhere.
Nope.
Yeah. Just a way to collect that insurance money. That's all.
Exactly.
There you go.
Yeah. So Anthony, kick us off. Tell everybody a little bit about you, your background, what you do, and all that good stuff.
Yeah, so I am a multifamily syndicator out of the Twin Cities. So we buy multifamily assets up here. We are vertically integrated, so we operate them. We don't do burn piles because we don't trust fire at all. In my story, before I got into real estate, it's kind of long and convoluted. Going back to college, I just knew that I was a really bad employee. Like when it came to working for other people, I'm really lazy. I figure out how to get the job done in like half the time so that I can just coast the other half. And, for me, that was never a good long-term recipe. Like I'm the type of guy who likes to be challenged, likes to grow, and like push myself. And so I needed to go out there and figure out what that was going to look like for me. And that just took me down kind of the entrepreneurial path. I was a professional rock climber for a while. I wrote science fiction and fantasy novels, and I started building businesses. And it was when I started building businesses that I really kind of started sparking my soul with joy and realizing like, man, this is really fun building things and seeing like how the different systems come together and working with people to see what we can realize. And so I built a number of businesses, a window washing company in San Francisco, a manufacturing company here in the Twin Cities, and then got into real estate kind of by happenstance. So like at a couple different points in my trajectory, real estate kind of intersected. And when I was in college, I was doing fix and flips with my roommate and his dad. And all I learned out of that was that I absolutely hate construction. Like I can swing the hammer, I can't hit the nail. So like that was never going to work out. And then about 10 years later, a buddy comes to me and he's like, hey, I'm buying these quads. Do you want to do that together? And I was like, not really, but I'll give you money. And so I did that, and he like went out and bought them. And that was a pretty good passive investment all told. But it wasn't until like maybe 2017 or so, I was back here in Minnesota and I was driving in downtown Minneapolis. At least this is the story that I tell people. And I don't even know if it's true anymore. But the way I tell it is I was driving into Minneapolis, looking up at the skyline, beautiful sunset, looking at the skyscrapers. And I was hit with the question, who owns a skyscraper? Like, what does it take to buy a skyscraper? And like, I have zero interest in owning a skyscraper, none whatsoever. But the question was really interesting, and it led me down this rabbit hole of trying to figure out like who owns these things. And in that quest, I started learning about multifamily, in particular, like how simple it was once you understood how the pieces go together. Like there's some really complicated businesses out there in the world, like the manufacturing side of my business. That's incredibly complicated. We're dealing with polyurethanes that I know nothing about. And so thank God I have really smart people around me. But real estate's very different. It's very accessible. And once you understand how these pieces click together, you can build really incredible things. So I started doing that, started small, wanted to really learn the systems with some triplexes and quads, make sure that I wasn't going to, kill myself in the process by going too big too soon. And then quickly learned, like after the first couple, like, okay, I have the confidence now to start building. And that's what we did. We started building, started JVing bigger buildings. And then in 2020, we started syndicating, and we did our first 2 syndications in 2020. Despite COVID, kind of had to make some shifts to the business plan, but we're still going strong, and it's kind of leading us into 2021 and where we're at right now.
Love it. That's awesome. When did you, in the Twin Cities, just for the timeline's sake, when did you buy your first property?
So the first property that I would consider like the start of my real estate business career was 2017.
Okay. So pretty quickly, not too long ago. So fairly recently that, you guys have been able to build a business and things like that. Did you go right in, like, is this a full-time thing for you, or you're doing this on the side with another job or another business, let's say?
Yeah. At the time for like up until the end of 2020, I was full-time at my other businesses, day-to-day operations. And it's only been, what day is it? The 12th today? It's only been 12 days now since I've officially pulled out of day-to-day operations of my other businesses. And that's only because we just have rock star teams in place now that they're able to run those. And so I'm officially full-time, full pedal to the metal on real estate at this moment. But up until this point, it was split. It was split between still writing novels. It was split between this manufacturing business. It was split between real estate. And, like that's good for me because I like being busy. If I'm not working, I don't know what I'm doing with myself. So like, that's not for everybody though. And I don't know if it's the path I'd recommend for a lot of people. Like, I think it's valuable to pick a lane, really stick to it. But for me, that's kind of what got me here.
Awesome. I think that's super interesting. So have you started or have you built up a team for the real estate side as well? Or it's still mostly you or I think you have a partner, right?
Yeah. My partner, Dan Krueger. So we're in the process of building that. So we're, like I said, vertically integrated. We have property management in-house right now. That looks like one full-time property manager, one full-time construction repair maintenance guy, and then a part-time maintenance guy. And we're getting to that threshold now where it's time to maybe bring on a next person onto that crew. But, one of my strengths is, I say, operational systems. And so, my other business, we have like 22 employees. And so really understanding what's the foundation of the systems that need to be in place so that these people can succeed and win at their jobs. And so that's what we're building right now, because we have some long-term vision of where we're trying to get to. And, it's going to require a lot of growth in the next couple of years. But before that to even work, we have to have the systems in place. So that's what we're focused on right now.
So somewhat selfishly, but I think it'll help John and also a lot of people. How are you looking at, as you're scaling, building these systems, like stuff like that? Like, how do you look at the systems, the processes, the business, come up with the different plans, come up with the roles and responsibilities for different people? Like, how do you tackle this problem of building a team, building processes in real estate with something tangible like the property management?
I think the first thing with business is whenever there's other people involved, like that's where things get really murky and really hard. And, the sticks and bricks of real estate is super simple, all things told, but people are just so mushy and complicated. And so it's a never ending battle. But for us, it really comes down to, three things. One is like, what's the operations manual? What's the culture book? And then what's the user's manual? So the operations manual is really, hey, when we're onboarding new people, what are the technical things that we need to get right so that we're in accordance with the law, right? That's like the W-2 or the W-9 and I-9 and W-2, whatever. And like all that technical stuff. And then you have to have the culture and you have to have the user manual. And the culture is like, everybody knows, like you have to start with why, and you have to like make sure that they have a good culture. Otherwise people aren't going to want to work with you long-term. And that stuff is actually really important, but it's super hard to put down into words and then actually implement. And the sooner you can do that, the better. Like the clearer you get on that vision, the better. People that wait too long to try and do that retroactively, like good luck. Like you've already kind of gone too far down the path and you have to like start all over. And then the user manual is, okay, what are all these technical jobs that need to get done? And how does the person do that job? Like step by step, walk it out so that you could hire somebody off the street tomorrow, put them in the position. And if they're, reasonably abled adult, they should be able to figure it out. That's the goal of every job, is to make it kind of idiot proof. And that's never actually possible because people come up with all sorts of brilliant ways to break the system. But that's just a sign that, people don't fail, systems fail. I think that's Michael Gerber from the E-Myth, right? Like if it's not working, there's something wrong with the system. So go back to that first and try to rework that before you start coming down on the person.
I think that's an awesome piece of advice, because one thing I started doing over the last week, I took the entire business and I've been brainstorming with some other people in this space that I operate in. And I basically said, give me every single thing you do, A to Z, right? And write it down. So I got like 3 or 4 friends that I work with, a couple larger than me, a couple smaller than me. And I basically took every role in the company that I believe is an integral part of the company.
Mhm.
And I just created basically a master list for each of those roles. And now creating a system, basically taking those tasks and saying, okay, to the point of walk into the office, sit down at the desk, log onto the computer, right? Because now you have an absolute A to Z manual that you can hand to somebody. And then what the plan was, and I spent a lot of time on this last week, I'm putting them to bed. And then next week, I'm going to bring them back out and I'm going to do each of those roles to see if I missed anything, right? So it's okay, log on to this website, check this, right? If I miss the step or I do something that's not written down, I'm going to write it down, because I think that's how you can create. And now listen, you don't have to do 100 roles, but you could take one role and write that task out and give it to someone to try. And if it executes perfectly, that's a system. And that, a person can't fail that because it's all there for them. If they don't do it, well, you got to figure out the piece there. But I think that's an amazing part of building any type of company or structure or business where you can step out of the seat that you're in, is to find someone to replace that. But to do that, you need a really detailed to-do list or a checklist, sort of like if you were, the stupid analogy that everyone's going to use is like, if you're getting in a rocket ship and you're about to go to space, you don't go in there and just hit the button to hit start, right? There's a lot of things that you have to make sure are working before you can go. So, or like starting your car, right? So I think that's really important. I just started doing it, probably something I should have done years ago, but better late than never.
Yeah. And the sooner you start, the better. And you might be thinking, like, right now where you're at, I'm just doing all the tasks myself. I'm too busy. But this is the difference between working on the business versus working in the business. And if you don't identify what are all those tasks that you do and how to do them, you're never getting out of that role. You're going to just be handcuffed to it forever. So it's best to start earlier than later. And don't overthink it. It doesn't have to be super complicated. Just write it out. Like, what are the things that you spend your time on? And then just really quickly bullet point how you would do it. And then over time, you can evolve that and get it better. The way we think about this in our business is we divvy it up into the difference between an A player, a B player, and a C player. So an A player is a player that if I give you a system, you're going to take it and you're going to improve it. You're going to make it even better over time. A B player is somebody that I can give the plan to, the system, and they're just going to execute it exactly as it's there. But they're not going to make it better, but they're not going to do it worse. And a C player, they're going to slowly degrade the system over time because they're cutting corners. They're just not very good. Ideally, we're always hiring A players, people that come in, they improve the system. That's not always possible, though. In some positions, some roles, you don't really need an A player to come and improve the systems. Sometimes you just need a body in the room to do the task at a B level, which is just execute it at the base level. But if you don't at least know what that looks like, then you can't hire for it. So start there.
No, that's phenomenal. I think breaking it down that way, because it's a good way to go about it, right? Like you said, it doesn't have to be ridiculously sophisticated. It could just be super simple. And then you find that person that can make that system flawless. That's the person you want. You don't want the two other people, 1.5 other people, because one of them's going to break it. The other one's going to do it. And if it's not detailed out, they're not going to do it efficiently. But it's a good way to go about building anything. And like I said, whether you're doing a very simple task or a super complicated task, it's very important to have those down, because it helps you bring in the right team, find out what you love to do and find out what you hate to do. And, I know we speak about it frequently here and we've had a ton of guests talk about it, but, as fast as you can outsource things that you hate doing, the more efficient you can be in working on the things that are going to, really drive home your growth, your revenue, your income, whole 9 yards.
Yeah, absolutely. Because those things that you hate to do, you suck at them. Like, right. We were talking about it before we came on the air, like spreadsheets. I'm terrible with spreadsheets. If I can put together the system, but it's going to be a pretty rudimentary system revolving around spreadsheets. I need to hire somebody who can do that much better. And there are tons of people that can do it much better, much faster, and they're going to make less mistakes than I'm going to make. So get those things that you hate off your plate so you can focus on what you love, because that's probably something that you're uniquely suited to do better than anybody else.
Without a doubt.
So you talked a little bit about like the culture and stuff too. How do you, because I think you said setting that culture early. I know a lot of times it goes hand in hand with like setting values or bullet points of like things you do. How do you think somebody should go about that process of like actually, because I think everybody probably has those values or has at least some inkling of, what they stand for, what they would like to do or goals or whatever. how would you advise someone, or how do you sit down and like actually come up with those company culture points or values?
Yeah, I don't have any advice for how to come up with them, because I think you just need to sit down with, yourself and maybe your partners and figure out like, what are the words that inspire you or that come to mind when you think about a business or somebody that you would want to work with. That could be, transparency or honesty or discipline or mastery or, stewardship, like whatever the term is, it's going to be unique to you. But the difficulty then is like translating that in a meaningful way that drives action on the boots on the ground level. And that's really difficult because you have the vision, you're living and breathing it, and your values are probably integrally tied to who you are as a person. So you've probably been going through the world for 20, 30, 40 years with this idea that like integrity means this thing to me. And if I have integrity and that's what it means. But, everybody else is going to define that differently. And the key is you need the people that are working with you to identify and define it the same way, because then you have consistency of action. Mm-hmm. And so I think it comes down to three things on that front for us. And it took us a really long time to figure this out. And honestly, we haven't really figured it out. It's just, this is what's helped us make more progress is one, you got to be really consistent with what you're saying. You got to set your vision, your values, or whatever it is, and you got to stick to them. You cannot shift them. You have to live it and breathe it every single day. And it can't just be every now and then you remember to talk about it. Every now and then you remember to try and like live up to it. Like it's got to be consistent. And then you got to have a ton of repetition. In marketing, you hear all the time, like it takes 7 touches before a person even becomes aware of your product. And some people say, oh, it's 22 touches. Like, doesn't matter how many touches it is. It's a lot. And it's the same thing when you're working with other people who aren't inside your brain all the time. They don't see your vision. They don't have a clue what you mean when you're talking about, dedication or pursuit of mastery. Like they don't know what that really means to you. And so you have to keep repeating it over and over until you feel like you're just beating the drum, and you assume that other people, like they get it by now. Like we've had employees for 3 or 4 years that have been with us, and we'll go through the values and we'll be like, okay, what's this mean in this context? And people go, I think it means this. And I'm like, how do you not get this yet? It's been 3 years. We talk about it all the time. No, it's not on them. It's just on us because we haven't repeated it enough and been clear enough about what it means and how to manifest it. And that leads to the third part then, is these values are really a lens for your crew to operate in the world through, right? So if one of your values is, let's say, integrity, then what's that functionally mean for a property manager or leasing agent? What's it mean to have integrity? Like give them tactical steps and saying like, this is what it means to us. When you're dealing with a resident, integrity means blah, 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 blah. And you give them that lens through which they can say, okay, if I do this, then that's an alignment, and they can start to extrapolate out and find intersections. But a lot of times when we talk about values, it's just way too high, pie in the sky. It's like, we value, great customer service. Like, okay, but what's that really mean? Like, give me an example of what that means. And until you can articulate that, until your crew can articulate it back to you, they don't really get it. They can't really live it out.
So it's interesting. And I had a bunch of different thoughts, but it almost sounds like you're saying like, where you're saying like integrity, right? Integrity is just a word to most people. Everybody's going to have their own interpretation of it, even if, even within partners or members. And as you scale down and, less communication is going to become even more transparent. So would you either create, like, let's say it was come up with 5 values or 5 bullet points of what your company stands for. Would you try to like create it into that actionable step? Like you were saying, like integrity for us means X, Y, and Z or something like that. I don't know how you would phrase it. Or would you say like integrity and then all your different positions, you would come up with like a tangible way that this would be implemented in your day to day? Or would you do both, like make it more actionable than just one word or a short phrase? And then also come up with like, whether it's a job posting or in somebody's like, quarterly review or however you review or sit down with people, like there's actionable items that people can extrapolate it into, where you said it's like, it's bulletproof, it's done for them. They don't have to figure out what integrity means as they're dealing with residents.
Yeah. So this is most fully flushed with, say, my manufacturing company. So I can talk about it a little bit more clearly there, because like we're still in the fledgling stages. We only have a couple of employees on the property management side. But the way that we think about it is, let's say, so this company, the manufacturing side, it's we produce polyurethane rock climbing holds. So if you go into an indoor climbing gym, all the holds that you see on the wall, we make those. And so our mission is we exist to get every hand on a hold. And that's at the very top of the structure. And then below that are our values, which is integrity in everything, pursuit of mastery, and steward manufacturing. And those are defined in very particular ways. And then underneath of that are our next, I would say, our disciplines, which is we create, we serve, we educate in everything that we do. And so regardless of which role you're in, let's say you're a shipping manager, you ask the question, okay, am I creating, am I serving, or am I educating right now? In this email with this customer, am I serving them, or am I educating them, or am I creating some kind of value for them? And then from there, you go back up through the chain and you say, okay, am I doing this with integrity? Am I doing this with mastery? Am I doing this with steward manufacturing? And then you go one step further and say, is this enabling climbing? Is this getting every hand on a hold? And so this works with property management too. If the goal is to provide an exceptional living situation for your residents, if that's the goal, is like to provide exceptional living, then everything filters down from that. And that could be through integrity or consistency, or just, valuing the end user, which is the resident in that situation. So you just have to have these, I would say, phase gates of, okay, I'm down here at the tactical level. What's the next step up here from here that I can apply this? And I think the more that you can kind of build that ladder down from the high convoluted mission statement of like, we exist to, provide exceptional housing. Like what's that? That's helpful, right? Like I can't do anything with that. Like bring that down and say, hey, we return customer or resident phone calls within an hour. And we make sure that we know everybody's name. And when we are on property and we see a tenant, we take the time to talk to them. We don't just pass them by. Like we stop to say hello. We ask them a question. How are they doing? Like when we get a maintenance call, we respond to that within X number of time, right? And we fix that within this period of time. We follow up to say, hey, is this still an issue, right? Like, so how do we manifest what it means to have exceptional living standards?
Gotcha. No, I think that's definitely helpful and clear. And I think when you broke it down on the manufacturing side, was definitely helpful. I think the only thing that I heard that was a little confusing for me was, I'm thinking about where you're talking about that B or C player, you're extrapolating a lot from like, hey, am I thinking about, this person when I'm, am I thinking about this part of these things when I'm doing this? And, taking that one step further to going into the tier above it, where you said like, as I'm crafting this email, if I'm educating someone, am I doing it with integrity? Mm-hmm. That feels like a lot of steps or a lot of friction in it. And I was listening to, what book is it? Atomic Habits. And they were talking about the UK when they were sending out tax documents. They were saying the link they were sending out was to a website with the link to the actual form. And the click-through rate was 19% or something. And when they changed it to the actual form, it went to like 24%, which when you're collecting owed taxes equates to millions and millions of dollars for a government. It sounds like very similar thing to me, where it's like you're adding more friction for them to extrapolate those different steps. And then when I heard you talk about the property management side, it sounded like there's more concrete things of like, hey, like we do this, and we do this because it relates to our values. Do you have something like that also for the manufacturing side, where it's like, the person you were saying is getting back to a customer? Is it, some sort of replying thing? Do you do that as well and it just didn't touch on it, or is it something else?
Yeah. Those are, I would say, the core disciplines, and discipline is a muscle, right? It's something that you develop over time. And when you're first new to a company, you don't have that muscle yet. You don't know what are all the things that you need to be doing and how to follow it up. And so even if you're an A player in life, like when you're first stepping into a new role, you're probably not an A player yet. Like everybody kind of like immediately starts at a B player, and then you build them up into that A. And so you're not just dumping all of this stuff, because this is the other issue, is like a lot of times we take the culture and we just dump it on new people, and like, here it all is, good luck. And like, it's like drinking out of a fire hose. So you have to have like a path for training people up. And that's the other part of the system. So, like John's talking about, you create the user manual of all the things that you do, but then how do you hand that to somebody and train them in on it, so it's not just overwhelming and they don't just throw it out and just start winging it? And that takes a lot of intentionality of like thinking through, new hires onboarding process. And that could be not just for the first week, but for the first 90 to 120 days or first year, kind of mapping it out and saying it's going to take, it's depending on the complexity of the role, right? Like if you're hiring for a high level role where they're in charge of a lot of people, it's going to take a long time to get them fully up to speed and like to the point where you can trust them. And like to the point of, I mentioned I stepped out of the day-to-day operations at this other company at the beginning of this year. It took 4 years of building the systems and the people around to be confident enough that I could do that and that the whole ship wouldn't just burn down. And so like it can take a long time, and recognize that sometimes you have to hire a B player and just put them into the role, but your goal should always be, how do I take this person and elevate them? How can I help bring them up to an A player? What would that look like? And understand their unique capacities and weaknesses, and then figure out how to work around that. Because that's your role as a leader, is like you want a team of A players, but it doesn't always mean that you're hiring A players right out of the gate.
Gotcha. I think that's super helpful. Do you constantly have, like, as you've now removed yourself and you're constantly removing yourself and working on that on the real estate side, as you put those people in places, do you have them constantly updating the different systems and practices and things that they're doing? Or is it like periodically? Like, how do you handle that aspect of it?
Yeah, so this is something that we learned the really hard way. So when we first started, we were like, we want everybody to be improving systems constantly. We want them to be like thinking about, okay, this thing that I'm doing right now, how can I do it better? And what we found was when you do that, it's kind of chaos. And people improve things that they think they're improving it, but a lot of times they're really just making a backward step, and they're repeating a process that you've already learned the hard way doesn't work for whatever reason. So a lot of times people aren't fully equipped to make improvements to systems. So you have to recognize, when is somebody making an easy 2-second improvement where it's not going to really affect the downstream, and when is somebody making a big macro change to a system? And we try to safeguard that a little bit by saying, okay, only these people are allowed to make the big changes to a system, like that fundamentally change it. And that's going to be, people who have had a lot of practice or a lot of experience with the company building the systems and seeing how they break, because system building is a very unique skill set. Not everybody is cut out for it. So we kind of protect that and say, okay, shipping specialists, if you want to change the system, you need to go up to your shipping manager, have that conversation together and collaborate on how to improve it. If it's a simple thing like, hey, we want to make sure that the right tool is in the right place at the right time, sure, you can move the stapler 3 inches over here because it's a little bit more convenient. That's not a big deal. But changing like the customer communication flow, that needs to go up through the ranks a little bit.
Gotcha. I think that makes a ton of sense. I do want to shift gears a little bit, because we've been talking a ton about company building, stuff like that, and talk a little bit more about the real estate side. You obviously started on some smaller stuff, did a couple joint ventures, used a lot of your own money, and then you've gone over to the syndication route. Is there like a reason behind that trend? Like, what are you guys looking to do? Are you looking to do more traditional syndicating, joint venturing? Like, what's the outlook for you guys?
Yeah, I would say, syndication just allows you to go so much bigger, so much further. But it's a hard path too. And I think syndication is like this really hoorah, everybody's doing it, everybody's reading books about it. It's super easy and accessible, and like, oh, anybody can be a syndicator at this point. For us, like the JVs were really intentional and like starting with our own money, because we wanted to start with our own skin in the game and make sure that if we burned down the ship, we were the only ones drowning because of it. And then from there saying, okay, now we're going up to the next size boat and we're bringing people on that we know are strong swimmers. So if we go down, they can swim home. So those are like friends and family and like people that we if we lose their money, like, yeah, it's going to suck, but we have a relationship with them. I'm going to pay them back out of my own pocket, and we're going to get them whole, because that's just the type of people that we are. So by the time we finally get to syndicating and like bringing on passive investors, we need to be really certain in our operations and our ability to hit the pro forma numbers that we're projecting, because it's one thing to say you're going to hit these returns. It's a whole nother other thing to go and actually execute it. Like everybody, it's so easy to say like, oh, you make your money when you buy. And that's just like horse crap. Like nobody makes money when they buy. All you did was take on a lot of debt, and like you have this new asset. And now it's about how do you operate this and execute the game plan. And so we want to be really sure before we ever took anybody's money that we were able to do that with a straight face and say like, we're going to do right by your money, and we're going to deliver to the best of our ability. And we're confident that we can do that. And so moving forward, syndication is a great route because it enables us to do something that we're passionate about, which is getting passive investors who don't necessarily want to take on active investing in real estate. It's creating an avenue for them to be involved and participate in the really awesome benefits associated with this vehicle without having to, go deal with tenants, toilets, and trash. And so that's really awesome for us. And we're going to keep going in that path. But our long-term vision is to build something that can positively impact our residents and positively impact our investors. So we're kind of at this unique crossroads where we have two customers, right? We have our residents, we have our investors. And it can be hard serving both simultaneously. You have to make some decisions sometimes about like who you're going to prioritize. But at the end of the day, like if you're always doing right by those two customers, then you're going to be doing all right as a business.
No, I think that's really interesting. And it was something you just touched on the end with the two customers. I think a lot of people forget that when you are in this syndication business, whether you have property management in-house or not, I would almost say your true customers are the tenants. Your secondary customers are the investors, but they're both customers or clients at the end of the day. I think some people forget because it's housing and it's something that people need, that at the end of the day, your tenants are customers, they are clients, and how you treat them, what you provide them, the what's the word I'm looking for? The atmosphere, or the God damn it, why can't the product, I guess, you're trying to give them, right? Mm-hmm. If they don't like it, it's not going to go well for your business. But so many people think that just because it's something that everybody needs, that's just a given, and you kind of just, half-ass it type of thing.
Yeah. For so long, we've been hearing, like, in the corporate world, it's all about maximizing shareholder value, right? Mm-hmm. Like that's what this public institution exists for. It got to improve and increase shareholder value. And the best way to do that, like people lose sight of the fact, the best way to do that is to create an amazing product that your customers want, mm-hmm. like that they're raving for. Apple, I'm not a big Apple fan, but they make great products that their customers rave about, and they've maximized shareholder value because of it. Same with Tesla. Like that's, at the end of the day, that's the game. And so if you get too short-sighted, just think about maximizing returns for your investors. That's entirely the wrong way to think about it. Go and create an amazing living opportunity for your residents. They're going to stay longer, which leads to less expenses on unit turns. And turn, like, it's easier to lease these things out. You can ask for more rent. You can drive value that way. And it all starts by doing a good thing, which is recognizing that, we operate sticks and bricks buildings, and the numbers are great. We're investors. We love all that. But at the end of the day, the product is we're creating and providing an awesome living opportunity for people, for families. And too often when people say, how many units do you have? Or like, how many assets do you have under management? They lose sight of the fact that it's not a unit. Like at the end of the day, there's a family living in there. That's the product, like the family living in there. And if you can connect with that and say, how do I make that family as happy as possible with their living arrangements in the way that I would be if I was living in that apartment, then that's what's going to maximize long-term shareholder value.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it's interesting because I was literally, before we hopped on this podcast, maybe 20, 30 minutes ago, I was on the phone with one of the flooring guys, and I've been trying to find out a ton of information about how to reduce the noise in the apartment, because we have just straight plywood subfloors, and I've already had a couple noise complaints. And even when I've been in the units, they're not crazy noisy, but there is some noise to it. And one of the things I want to do is put in vinyl flooring in the upstairs, because from a long-term standpoint, it's going to be much cheaper, cost effective, as well as look aesthetically better than if we went with just carpet. But one of the big concerns I have is that noise aspect of it. And I keep having this conversation with people of like, well, what's your plans? What's whatever, like, you don't want to overspend. You don't want to spend too much money. And for me, I keep coming back to, if you just create this awesome place for people to live, they don't want to leave if you have a really nice place for them to live and they're happy and secure and whatever. And that also translates into the financial side of things. Like John and Mike, not John, put together this spreadsheet of turnover when you go from like, what was it, a 12 to 14 month lease. And it was like your costs just go down. And for me, it's the same concept of like, okay, even if I overspend today, but I create this really quality living environment for somebody that they're not going to have a ton of issues. It's going to be better than a lot of stuff they have in the market. Yeah, that doesn't translate in the marketing aspect of what I do, or in photos or in tours. But when somebody's been living there for 10 months, I mean, anybody that's lived in a slightly shitty apartment or gotten less than what they asked for, you're not happy down the line. And it's not something that necessarily hits you right away, but it's like, okay, month after month after month, if there's, noise, or if you got a leaky faucet, or if you've got this or it's that. And it's, it's not the big things that add up, I think, in your living situation, unless it's like, you got termites, right? But that's a bigger problem. It's those little things that if you can solve, they're going to translate down the line of, how many turnovers am I going to average for this unit over 10 years? Is it going to be 10? Is it going to be 5? Is it going to be 2? Is it going to be 0? Like, those are the things that, you can't really underwrite to, and it's really tough to put on paper. But for me, as I'm kind of looking at this process that I'm going through, it's one of the theses I have that I really believe is true, and, we'll find out. But if I can just provide a better quality living place, it's going to translate in several ways down the line, whether it's lowering my expenses in the second year so I can get a higher, NOI and a higher refinance amount post renovation, or it's when I go to sell, my expenses are crazy low. So even if instead of selling it for a 5 cap, I sell it for a 5.5 cap. Well, if my expenses are 20% less, maybe it offsets, or maybe it's even more, right? Like, or maybe it's just so turnkey for somebody, they're willing to pay a premium for it. Like, whether I hold on to it for 10 years or not, I just think there's value in it that's really tough to put on paper for somebody. But it comes back to that whole experience that you were talking about, and providing, this product, or, just housing for somebody that's super vital, that people want and need. And, if you can have nobody leaving for many, many years, it's just going to be super profitable.
It's the idea that the return on karma can't be quantified, but downstream it has the most effect on end value. It's like, whether you're being a good person to your residents, or being a good person to your employees, or just being a good person to your brokers or lenders or whoever it is, like, and doing right by them, like, the return on karma just can't be quantified. But if you can start to think about that, like, not all things that mattered can be measured, but like, there's more to that quote, but it's a fundamental idea that I think a lot of people lose sight of when they try to get everything onto the spreadsheet and track every number, because what gets measured gets managed. And it's like, yeah. But, at the end of the day, some things can't be underwritten.
Well, John, we would talk about this all the time whenever we would look at properties, and it's like, how do you quantify the value add for doing exterior renovations? Like, how much more can you charge for putting in a dog park, or for putting in a pool, or for painting the exterior, doing landscaping, or installing curbs, right? None of these, like, you can't say like, oh, I put in a pool, and maybe a pool you can, right? Pool, you get a little bit more, but a dog park, or putting in curbs, or putting in nicer bushes, or putting down gravel or stone or mulch, those aren't things that you can like quantify. And it's really tough to compete online with marketing, because you could put down mulch in the first year and then you never do it again for the next 5 years. And in year 5, your property looks worse than if you do it consistently. But most people are going to come to the property and be super dissatisfied, whether it's before they sign a lease or after they sign the lease. And if it's after they sign the lease, well, it's just going to be that turnover thing we were talking about. If it's before they sign the lease, you're just not going to get the rent or the tenants you're looking for, or you're not going to have as good of a translation on like your closing rate for people that inquire on the property. So like, you're just going to have a super low closing rate. So your employees are going to have to work harder. So less gets done at the property. So they're really spending more time. A lot of these things translate. And again, like, how do you quantify that, right? How do you say like, oh, if we put, if we do paint and mulch and, seal and stripe the parking lot and, do new exterior lighting and all this stuff, that, hey, we're going to close 50% more tenants that drive onto the property, and we're going to retain 30% more tenants that live here. Like, unless you have the data to back that up, but how do you like A/B test that, right? Like, it's just something that's crazy. But I think it's super powerful. And I think it's something that's totally remiss as people talk about, especially in the value add world where people are in and out of deals every, 2 to 3 years.
The goodwill that you can create around those items, the noise complaints, right? Minimizing it, the landscaping, the goodwill that's created there is not a ROI driven calculation. It's impossible. You can't figure it out, right? Yes. If there's no windows in a unit and you put windows on and now you can bring that unit back online, you can quantify that. But to create a good brand and a good, safe, clean, comfortable place to live in an environment that's inviting to the tenant base, the quantification on that is 10 years down the road when you had 2 units turnover or 4 units turnover, right? That's how you can quantify it, but it can't be quantified on a going in underwriting, right? So, but it's something we speak about it frequently. It's just, there's the things to do that are going to drive value, and there's the right things to do that are going to drive value. And there are things that are necessities that sellers sort of turn a blind eye to and say, I don't give a shit. And if you don't do it the right way going in, you're going to make the business plan harder to obtain and to achieve because you didn't do the right stuff up front. And, I get pushback all the time because when we're on our calls and they ask things like that, I'm always, yes, do it. Do I beat them down on price? No, not really, because I know that mulching it every year, when a tenant shows up, they're going to close more leases because they're going to see the property, and a well-maintained property is the first thing a tenant can look for and say, okay, they take care of the outside. Now do they take care of the inside? And did they take care of the residents? And if the answer is yes, 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 you're going to get a lease. They're going to move in. And your culture, your environment, not only from the tenant perspective, but from your employee perspective, and not if you're doing third party, it's their, your management employees. But if your leasing agent likes to work there and live there and she likes what you are about, you typically are going to get a little bit more out of that person than if you're a slumlord and the tenants are calling every day and the leasing agent is, hiding under her desk and not answering calls because no one wants to be in that environment. So that goodwill there's no cap rate, or you can't put any value to that except for the culture you bring to what you're doing. So, we're huge believers in that. Yes, you're driving ROI and you're driving returns for your investors, but at the same time, a good place to work and a good place to live is going to aid in that return on value and return on investment to investors.
Something I think a lot about is, people talk about brand and how important it is to have a strong brand that your customers and your employees can connect with. Because when there's pride in the product, whether that's for your customer or for the employee, then they work harder, like you're pointing out. If they're psyched on the product that they live in or that they're helping fill vacancies in, then they're going to push it harder than if you're a slumlord. But the idea then is like, how do you value brand? Like when you're looking at value add and you're going into these properties and you're repositioning them, like downstream, the effect of being able to go to market with a strong brand, whether that's going to market and trying to lease it out or selling it, like you can't really quantify that. But I think we all realize that brand is everything. And there's this intangible value associated with it, but you can't build brand overnight. It's a long-term play of consistent behaviors that people see play out over a long period of time. And so you got to have a plan for like, how are you building that reputation?
100%.
Yeah. I think it's, you talk about, right, like the Nike swoosh, right? Like, how do you quantify that? It's worth trillions of dollars or billions of dollars, whatever it is. Nobody designing the logo 20 years ago was sitting there going, hey, you know what? You guys are going to be worth X amount of billions of dollars in the future. I did a logo, give me 200 million. They would have been laughed out of the room, right? But it's the brand they've built around that swoosh. It's the brand around that recognition that people identify with that makes it what it is, right? And going back to a little bit of what we were talking about earlier with, the brand and the values and stuff, it's the same thing. They've just put something on it that it's like, when you see that swoosh, you know exactly who it is, exactly what they're about, exactly what they do in and around a certain sphere, hemisphere, whatever you want to call it. And I think that's the thing that's very tough to find in like the apartment world or in the housing world, where it's like, like there's very little brand recognition, especially from your customers. Nobody's like, oh my God, these are amazing managers, unless it's like, a little bit of word of mouth, or, they're a more national regional company. It's very tough to get that brand recognition and stuff like that, partially because I think it's just a tough business to build any brand in, because you are dealing with, people's housing. And obviously there are consequences that come with that, whether it's, eviction, late payments, just the overall reputation of the industry as a whole, makes it tough to build an overwhelming positive brand. But I do know there is got to be some sort of way to at least increase it, or have some of that, where, I think a lot of people fail to even try or do that.
Yeah, that's exactly it. Residents, apartments are hard. You nailed it on the head. Like, you're dealing with people's housing. That's a very sensitive thing, first of all. Like, generally, nobody likes the idea of a landlord. Like, it doesn't, nobody wants somebody lording over their home. They want it to be their thing. And then you just have this transient customer base. And so somebody might be buying an apartment right now. They might be there for 2 or 3 years, and then they upgrade to the next thing. And if you have some product that you can move them into that's keeping pace with their life, then great, you can be their long-term customer. But a lot of times that's not really the case. Like, if you have a niche within, value add multifamily C class, and they're moving up to the next A class, you don't have anything for them. So your relationship with them kind of ends, and that's difficult. And so I think most apartment operators, though, aren't doing themselves any favors, because they think along those lines, and they're like, well, that's the point of putting in this time and energy of trying to like create this atmosphere. It's just wasted. And that's where I think the opportunity lies for great operators to come in. And because even if you can just increase your tenant occupancy or like retention by like a couple of months, like you're pointing out, if you can go from 12 months to 14 months, like, it's huge downstream. So recognize, like, you don't need to go in there and win, like hit grand slams every time. Like, if you just always hit a single and you never strike out, like, you're probably going to do pretty good long term.
Yeah, I think it's the impact of incremental, improvements, that 1% better every day, that translate a lot into those things. But it's so tough to put on paper. It's like, you go to like an OM, right? And it's like, John's in this, kick of ripping on brokers with old OMs. And it's like, brokers have even less skin in the game than we do. So they just, they'll put numbers on paper, and it's like, oh, you ask them the question, well, how come repairs and maintenance is going from, X to Y? And they're like, well, Y is in line with market. And it's like, that's not a good answer, right? But it's like, how do you sit down when you're doing this? Like, oh, we're going to reduce our, it's very hard to say we're going to reduce our turnover by just providing an exceptional client experience, customer experience. Like, that's very tough to do. But in my heart of hearts, I do think it is something that is very true and very possible and attainable. Just if you reverse engineer it, like if you just think about your own, again, you come back to just your own housing situation. I would imagine everybody's been in, good and bad housing, whether it was the person who built it did a shitty job, whether the person you're renting from did a shitty job, whether you borrowed money from a bank and they're just, up your ass, or bad communication or whatever. Everybody's had, I would imagine, or most have had some sort of bad experience with housing at one point in their life. And it, people don't stay in bad housing, right? Nobody wants to come home away from work and have a bad experience day in, day out. They're going to figure out a way to get out and go into something that serves their need better.
You mentioned something there that it ties into the OM and underwriting and setting the business plan, is the idea that averages only work in the aggregate. And a lot of time, like, that's good for like initial underwriting. And this is kind of tangential now, but I think too many operators, and too many new operators specifically, they take averages and then use that to speak to the specific. And it's like, well, it doesn't really work that way. You can start there. That's a great starting point to understand the averages, but then you need to narrow down and get real specific to your individual building and your business here on this, plot of land.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Like, I was helping somebody out with a building, and their 2020 T12 showed like a normal R&M number, but their 2019 showed a super high number. And I was like, I was like, what is that? And he was like, I don't know. I was like, how do you not question that? Like, that's a huge thing showing up that they don't even address anywhere. Mm-hmm. There are things that get super specific, even if they've brought it down. How do you know if it's a one-time cost or a reoccurring cost? And they just decided not to do it this year because they wanted to sell it for more money and said, fuck it. These tenants can be unhappy for, 9 months. I'm selling it, and can be the next person's problem. Like that happens all the time and very regularly. It's happened to us where people just, as they get ready to sell, they just say, do the landscaping every other week, do the pool maintenance once a month, right? Let's reduce our costs for the next 6 months. People can get a little unhappy. That's fine, because we're not going to own this anymore. So it's not our problem, but let's show the buyer that, our expenses are 10% less than last year. So we can get an extra, 10% or 5% in purchase price. Like, you can't just take the law of aggregates, can't just go by the past. You've got to really understand what's going into it. And it's not always easy, right? Especially as you're getting started, like you said, right? Like those averages are a great place to start. And sometimes look, you just rob from Peter to pay Paul, right? You get it wrong, right? Your budget's never right. I've never put together a budget or a pro forma on a deal and been right on the nose 12 months from the day we bought it. Just doesn't happen. So, there is some flexibility there, but just understanding what goes into it and how it works and, what's going on at the property as best you can beforehand is super important than just slapping $350 a unit on paper.
Mm-hmm.
John, you've been quiet. This is one of your bugaboos.
Yeah, no, you guys are doing a great job voicing where I just go ballistic, right? Because everything you identified are things that when I bring up and talk to you, whether you're talking directly to a seller or a broker or whatever, they like ignore it to the point, I had a conversation with someone earlier today that people are just throwing it. They don't give a shit, right? It's like, well, someone will be there in the future for this no matter what I do. I had a call yesterday on a deal where the kid said, lipstick on a pig, don't even touch this. And I said, yeah, but what if it doesn't work? You want to be left with a dud? You want to operate a deal that doesn't work? And he said, there's someone for this in the future. And I was like, yeah, maybe not. But you're seeing that so frequently now because less deals are selling, more buyers are out there than ever. So somebody gets to the finish line, good, bad, or indifferent. And these are things that I talk about frequently, but it goes in deaf ears. So all you can do is continue to offer, stay consistent, and you'll shake one free. Eventually, it just, you got to put in more effort trying to find that deal to eliminate all of these issues where you can create, when you buy something, the right environment, brand, strategy, or whatever you're looking to accomplish.
So right before we went live, John, you were mentioning like you just had a deal that you were kind of looking at and you wanted to get it for 100 less, and then it ended up going under contract for 400 more. And I remember thinking when you said that, I was like, yeah, there's almost always somebody out there willing to pay more. But that's a horrible exit strategy. If you're relying on that as your exit strategy, good luck. Long term, you're going to get burned.
It's over. That's the game of hot potato. And you're going to be the last guy left. And that's when a world of fucking hurt's going to happen, right? When you can't make your debt service. There's deals floating around right now where I know the guys are writing checks out of their pocket every month to pay their debt service, and they are sticking their foot in the mud on a price. And I'm like, are you crazy? Take less, and then you don't have to write a check for another 6 months. Because when you get the greater fool theory or the guy that's willing to pay for it, those typically don't close quickly. They typically take a little bit longer, and you got to educate the bank. And as the owner of that property, you're hemorrhaging longer. And if that guy falls apart, where are you left then? Right? One guy bought a deal. It's 80 plus units. He put 50 grand into it over the course of a year. The thing's got 26 down units. It's a disaster. And he's not budging at all. I'm like, all right, well, you're either going to find an idiot or it's going to break.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And what happens too is that conversation that happens, people try to spin stories, but it's a really small world, especially if you're focused in an area, specific deal size. You make 2 or 3 calls, you found out who had it under contract, you're going to find out very quickly why they bailed. And I'll tell you right now, if somebody says, we bailed because we learned about X, Y, and Z, and there's more problems than we thought, and we knew we were going to cost more, rather than the conversation of like, let's say you over improved it and it's just not worth what you thought it was going to be worth. That's a very different call you're going to have. And, your sale process is going to go very differently. Like even just the conversation with investors, I would imagine, or even with yourself or partners, like the 2 scenarios for me is like, okay, we either undercapitalize and try to find the greater fool, or we overcapitalize and we just miss our sale price in the future. I mean, that conversation to me is way easier. It's like, one, you've now got a deal that's easier to manage, is taken care of, probably has less headaches. You overcapitalize, do more than you were supposed to, unless you're just throwing money at dumb shit, right? Like if it was like you put 5 pools on a 50 unit property, that's just dumb, right? But if you're just, you over improve the property, you put it on nicer materials, things like that, that's not a bad conversation. You're just wrong. Like that happens. But if you undercapitalize, now you've got a lagging project that needs more money, that is tough to sell, that people don't want to buy, that's going to run into problems and have more management. I just think those are two very different conversations. And I can tell you right now which one I'd rather have.
100%.
It's always better to be overcapitalized, no question. And if you're thinking about coming into a deal a little thin to make the numbers work, like, well, you're already on the road to perdition at that point. So good luck.
Yeah, absolutely. I think that's actually a fantastic place to wrap up. But Anthony, thank you so much for coming on the show. This was fantastic. Where can people get in touch with you, learn more about you, follow along?
Yeah, join us at invictusmultifamily.com if you want to check us out over there and what we're doing up here in the Twin Cities. Otherwise, we have a podcast called Multifamily Investing Made Simple, and it's just what it sounds like. We try to take the complexity out of real estate so more people can get involved without getting burned.
Awesome. Guys, definitely go check out the show. I was on it. It was really fun. And I think probably a good episode if I do say so myself.
It was pretty good. Yeah.
So definitely at least go check out that one, if not the more recent ones. And definitely go check out the website as well, because they're doing some great stuff. But thank you guys so much for listening to this episode of the podcast. If you're not already subscribed, it would mean the world to John and I if you would do so. And if you are, please send it to someone that would get a tremendous amount of value from this episode. Anthony, once again, thank you so much for coming on. This was awesome.
Yeah, thanks, guys.